Hello and welcome back to Future You, the podcast brought to you by graduate careers experts Prospects. I'm your host, Emily Slade, and in this episode I speak to Mike about being a sports commentator.
My name is Mike Sewell. I'm predominantly a sports broadcaster, voiceover artist, and an occasional host. And I've been doing that for just over 30 years. Amazing.
So let's go right back to the beginning. What does your educational journey look like?
Quite checkered. Certainly after school, I was at school in Norwich, fairly straightforward education. I was pretty average at everything, apart from woodwork and metalwork. I excelled in that, and my grandfather was a draftsman. His father owned a furniture shop in Norwich, and after a couple of years of learning how to do these things, I thought, I want to be a cabinet maker, I want to be a furniture maker like my great-grandfather. And so that was always my focus towards the last year or two at school, but I couldn't get an apprenticeship anywhere. So my next best option was to go to City College, do a City and Guilds in furniture making, but within 4 months, by Christmas, I realised it wasn't for me. It was too machine-led. So I stopped it, thought, what am I going to do next? And like a lot of people, ended up with a job at Norwich Union, as it was, Aviva, as it is now. Mm-hmm. Spent 3 years there, but all the time during that, I realised I wanted to do something different. And I'd always had a passion for football. I mean, like a lot of boys, I used to run around the garden commentating, but I never thought it was a job. I always thought it was for something else. You'd have to be born into it or know someone in high places. So I didn't really go along that route. And I had the fortune of being able to go to America to study. But again, it only lasted a semester. And I came back again, went temped back at Norwich Union. So for a third time, I was thinking, what am I going to do? And then it's quite interesting. Where we're sitting now is literally across the road from where I had probably the most important conversation I've ever had in my career. Friends of mine used to live in one of the flats here, and we were chatting. This was the time that I was back after America, and he was saying, what do you enjoy doing? I said, well, I love my football. I'd love to be a football commentator. I enjoy radio. And he said, well, I work at hospital radio in Norwich. Why don't you try that? And basically that conversation sparked me into action. I did hospital radio. I went back to college for a third time, did a media course. There weren't many of them about. I think I was the first year actually that did it. And I said to myself, I'm going to finish this course. I'm going to finish it. And then even during that course, I got the opportunity to do some stuff at Radio Norfolk, and well, I don't want to say the rest is history, but yeah, it got me going.
Yeah, amazing. So you got your foot in the door with BBC Radio Norfolk. Was that in a freelance capacity?
What happened was I was at City College. I think it was the second year of my 2-year course, and we had to have a placement for 3 weeks. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go to the radio. And there was Radio Broadland at the time and Radio Norfolk, but Broadland I don't think did any sport. So I went to Norfolk, spoke to the editor, who was a guy called Roger Ryan, and he chatted to me. He even made me do a voice test on mic and said, can you just read this script for me? And I've never read a script. Other than the odd thing at hospital radio, I'd never read a proper sports bulletin. So I read it the best I could. And he said, oh, that's all right, it's quite good. He said, anyway, come in Saturday. We do a Saturday show. You can sit in the gallery, you can watch the show go out and see what we do. So I thought, oh, great. So this is voluntary. But this would have been ahead of doing the attachment. So he said, yeah, you can do the placement. So I went in on a Saturday and I walked in the door, and Radio Norfolk used to be at Norfolk Tower in those days, long corridor. And I didn't even get to the end where he was. And he said, stop there. He said, you're going to cover a match. Here's a phone. And in those days, mobile phones were like concrete blocks with a handset on top. And he said, you're going to cover Fakenham against Brightlingsea in the Jewson League. And I went, I've never done a game in my life. I haven't done no preparation or anything. You'll be fine. He said, you sound all right. Here's the keys to the pool car. There's the thing. And I got sent to Fakenham, and I went. And it was a cold February day. I hadn't planned for it, so I wasn't even dressed right. And I literally got there, and I'd never been more scared in my life of going live on the radio, hiding in corners so none of the people there could see me. And I finished the day, and I thought, oh, what a relief. I've done. And he rang me and said, can you do a couple of interviews for us? And can you get the man of the match and the manager? The man of the match happened to be an ex-professional who was pretty well known at the time, a guy called Luther Blissett. And he was my first ever interview post-match. And he was great. The manager was great. And I got through the day, and then I worked from there. And basically, I did games every week, and then I did the placement. But the interesting thing is, 20 years later, I was commentating on a game with a co-commentator who was Luther Blissett, the first guy I ever interviewed. And I told him the story.
That's so wonderful. Wow, so that is like a full baptism of fire there.
Absolutely, yeah. But it was the best thing that could have happened.
Of course.
Yeah.
Do you think that kind of thing still happens today?
Yeah, I think it probably does. I don't know if it'd be quite like you're walking in a door to do something else and someone sends you out. But certainly in local radio, you go in, you start doing local football, and you gradually work your way up. That was always, most of the people I worked with further down the line in network radio had come that route, either through commercial or through radio. The landscape's really different now because the internet was around, but it was in its infancy. There was no streaming online. It was literally radio, TV were the mediums. And TV, they didn't do it like Radio Norfolk did, for example. So the jobs were quite limited. And it wasn't, and I think most people didn't even know that was a job necessarily. You wouldn't think, oh, I'm going to become this is why I didn't do anything until I had the conversation across the road. And a lot of it comes down to luck. My timing was good. And okay, I volunteered my time for a long time. I didn't get paid or anything. But that was always the way in for me. I think now it's slightly different because you can go in via a different route, because you can use social media to get in, you can use streaming, you can do it for free. You could go to a local football club with a laptop and a microphone and just offer to stream it for the club for nothing, but you get yourself out there. I always think that's a really good way, because in my day it was always like, watch the telly, turn the volume down and commentate. Now you can go to the game, any local club, and as long as they're happy, you sit there and commentate on their team. That would be a good way for me. But I think now there are more inroads than there were then. But there wasn't as much competition then. Now the competition is fierce because people realise I can do this as a job.
So tell me a bit about your time in local radio and then where you went next.
Well, at Radio Norfolk, I mean, I have to say, it's still, even 30s on, it's the best place I've ever worked. I learned so much. I was obviously passionate about it, and I wanted to learn, and they were very good at allowing you to just go in the studios late at night when they've opted to the regions or the network. I'd sit there for an hour, records, cut tape in those days. yeah, I used to splice tape, and then you'd be playing in records. I'd be talking to nobody, but I'd be recording it, and then I'd go home and I'd listen to it and think, that was good, that wasn't so good. I'd listen to people in those days. If you're local to Norwich, you'll have heard of Roy Waller, Wally Webb, all those guys who were good DJs / broadcasters. And I did everything at Radio Norfolk. I whenever anything came around, can you cut some tape? Yep. Can you drive this presenter to King's Lynn to the office? Yep, no problem. Can you go and do a simul rec? I don't know if they do simul recs anymore. A bit too complicated to explain. But can you go and interview this? So I'd do news, I'd do sport, I'd do phones, weather, rip and reads off the travel, everything, in addition to eventually getting the sports morning bulletins, which the guy, Roger Ryan, who I mentioned before, who's the editor, he stepped away. A guy called Matthew Gudgeon stepped in, and I took Matthew Gudgeon's job. And then for probably 2 years, I did early sports bulletins. But I knew as I was going along, as much as I loved being there, and I love my hometown, home city, I did have a pangs to work at network, because I loved what Radio 5 Live did. They were Radio 2 when I was young, but Radio 5 Live in their sport, and I thought I want to work there eventually. And I knew my path at Radio Norfolk was blocked, because Matthew Gudgeon, great broadcaster, he was going to stay a fair while. Roy Waller was the established commentator and a personality. So I thought, really, if I do want to progress, I need to go elsewhere. Otherwise, I'd have to wait and be patient. And so after 3 years, I applied for a job at BBC Northampton, so another local radio station, and surprisingly got it. I didn't expect to get it, but I got it. And it was good because I became the editor, and we had a great patch because we had a professional football club, 2 semi-pro clubs, a rugby club, professional rugby club, the cricket, and Silverstone Racetrack. So we had the British Grand Prix. So I had a lot higher profile stuff in that region. And I did 3 years there. And yeah, I'd worked my way. So I was learning all the time. And I'd got by the time I left Radio Northampton in 1999, my understanding of everything from the bottom through to editor was really good. And I've always had that feeling that if you can learn from the bottom, when you get to the top, you know what it's like for those people coming through at the bottom. You have a really good understanding of what they're doing, rather than be like, I don't know, short-tempered or impatient and saying, no, you need to do that. You think, oh, I know that takes a long time. I know that they're... Do you see what I mean? So
100%.
it's a bit old-fashioned, I suppose, in this current age, but it worked for me.
It's very important. And you mentioned, like, you love football, you've wanted to commentate on the football, but it also sounds like you had a grasp of the other sports as well. And was that things that you would just go out and learn the terminology and all of the different rules and things for sports that you weren't perhaps even as passionate about, but you knew you needed to get a grounding of almost anything that was going on?
Yeah, I always liked motorsport, motorbikes particularly, and because we had the British Grand Prix, I had to be up on the Formula One. But at the time, I think I was quite into my Formula One. It was sort of post Senna days, which were the halcyon days. So it was Michael Schumacher and people like that. So it was very high profile. That came quite naturally. But the one sport that didn't come naturally, or two sports that didn't come, were cricket and rugby. And of course, they were big in that patch. Luckily, I had two people that were doing it. The cricket guy was very well known. He was I left him to it. Rugby, my editor said to me, he said, I like the way you commentate on football. He said, I want to hear you commentate on the rugby. And I went, I don't know anything about rugby. I said, I can commentate on someone running down the pitch and the ball being thrown, but technicals, I don't know. So one day, it was a professional game. This is Northampton Saints against Newcastle. They had the guy that was doing it sat next to me with prompt cards.
Wow.
So I was fine with the action, but I didn't know when a penalty was being awarded or an offside. I mean, I don't even know the terminology now. Mm-hmm. And he sat there prompting me.
Amazing.
And it was incredibly stressful for me because I'm a bit of a perfectionist and I just didn't want to screw it up. Mm-hmm. And he said afterwards, he said, no, you did well. And I said, oh, I can't do that again. I said, I need to do something where I feel natural. Mm-hmm. And I'd grown up with football. I know the terminology. If I'd grown up with rugby, I'd be the other way round. I said, but it's not for me. So I didn't do another game. That's the only rugby game I ever did. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you know what it's like when you do interviews. You get sent to do a certain task. You have to basically learn about it in the space of half an hour before you leave the office.
On the way there, yeah.
Or on the way there in the car, and you're listening to something, or you're running around your head. I mean, at Radio Norfolk, I had 9 months on the news desk, and they gave me the National Health Service figures for Norfolk. I can't believe they gave me that job. And I was bamboozled. I couldn't do it. And I thought I'd done it. And then the editor, Jill Bennett, said, speak to the health correspondent at Look East, just to make sure everything's happening. And I spoke to him and I was completely off the mark, which you have to learn on the job.
And lean into your strengths, but also be willing to pick up on anything that's going, really.
Yeah, but you like I say, in those early days at Radio Norfolk, you have to be prepared to learn, because actually, when it comes down to it, those horses for courses things you do, those means to an end, really benefit you. That 9 months on news, I'd say I didn't enjoy pretty much any of it, apart from maybe one job. Yet what I did, I edited quicker, I turned things around quicker, I packaged up quicker, and you learn. And it was all useful for the future sports stuff.
Mm-hmm. So what happened once you left local?
When I left local, in those days, the end of the 90s, 5 Live were offering, and the BBC were offering a lot of attachments at network level, particularly at it's actually BBC Sport, or it's a sub-department, BBC Radio Sport, part of BBC Sport, which provides sport for 5 Live, all the networks actually, the radio side, and then there's TV like Match of the Day and all the programmes, Focus and Final Score and all those things. But I was predominantly Radio Sport, so they had jobs, attachments going. I applied, and I actually went for production one first, and I did the interview. I did the board, as they call them in the BBC. You know about boards. You're in front of a committee almost. Normally 2-3 people would be the norm. So it's quite intimidating, especially at network level. So you're coming from local, you need to be on it. And I did the interview, and I thought it went well. And then I got a call back saying, you did the interview well, we were really happy with it, but you want to be a broadcaster. And in those days, there was very much a split. Nowadays, it's a bit more fluid, but in those days, especially at 5 Live, local radio was different. You do everything. 5 Live, you were either broadcaster or you were a producer or editor if you went up higher. There were a few people that merged between the two, but not many. And he said, you want to be a broadcaster, don't you? I said, yeah, I want to be a commentator, I want to read bulletins, I want to interview people, I want to do features. He said, well, this is a production job, and if you do this job, you'll be a producer, and you may get the odd chance, but it won't be regular. He said, we've got some broadcaster jobs coming up, attachments in a few months' time. He said, we're not going to offer you this, but we'd like you to come forward and go for that. So I was thinking, I'm being palmed off here. But true to his word, I did the interview, and I obviously did a good enough interview, and I got an attachment. So I was 9 months there. It went really well. Again, I having stepped up a level. You're going back a bit, so you're doing all the bulletin, late night bulletins, early bulletins. But I worked on 5 Live, Radio 1, Radio 2, the Today programme on Radio 4, PM on Radio 4, World Service. And I mean, I was on the Chris Moyle show and things, and Steve Wright. I'd go in the studio with Steve Wright, Simon Mayo. These were things. I was in London. I was just thinking, this is incredible. I had a great time. But then there was a little bit of a blip, because after the 9 months, they had permanent jobs going. And there were 3 permanent jobs, and I was with 3 people on attachment. And someone else had come in the meantime on an attachment, and that person got one of the permanent jobs ahead of me, which was a bit of a disappointment on my part. And they said to me, you're going to have to go back to local radio. So I fought my corner, and I was very, very resistant to it. I said, I'm not going back. One, because I wasn't going to learn anything. And I thought, if I go back, I'm out of sight, out of mind. So to the editor's credit, he said, okay, I'll have a look around, see what we can do. And they basically got me an attachment on the World Service, which was in the same room. So I was still seeing the same people, but I worked on the World Service, which was, again, really good, because you're broadcasting through the night, doing lots of different things. You've got tens of millions of people listening to you in Africa. So I did 9 months of that, and then at the end of that, I got the permanent job I wanted. And I spent, in total, I spent 12 and a half years at BBC Radio Sport, which was primarily Radio 5 Live.
It's important, I think, to see how much you sort of have to... You go up a rung of the ladder, and then you have to stay on that floor for a bit, and then you go up another rung and you stay on that floor for a bit, and there might be times where you have to go back down again, but you can, I think that's very important. And
also, because I didn't want to get to a level where there's a gap in the middle where I feel lost. You always have moments where you think, oh gosh, I've really flying by the seat of my pants, but in general terms, I wanted to have that background all the way through, and all those things that happened were all beneficial in the long run. And I would always say, like with anything, just take the chances. I'll be honest, and I do have regrets where I was resistant to some things, like they wanted me to do more television, like on-screen stuff with bulletins and that. And I resisted that because I was very much a radio person. And I regret it now, because with everything that there is, I have done presentation, but not as much. Mm-hmm. And I probably missed opportunities that I should have taken. But then again, I was lucky. I had a lot of opportunities I never thought I'd get. Mm-hmm.
So staying here for a bit, what advice would you give to people looking to enter into sports commentary?
Well, commentary in particular? Yeah, I think, like I said there, it's very hard just to walk straight into anything. Mm-hmm. And I know, and this is not, I'm not being critical of media courses or anything like that, because now the broadcast journalism course here at the UEA is excellent, and they're brilliant grounding for what I didn't really have. That they're great grounding. That doesn't necessarily mean that if you spend 3 years there and you don't do anything on the side, any experience on the side, that you're going to walk straight into a commentary job at Radio Norfolk or any local BBC station. A lot of those jobs now are tied up for years. It's very hard to break in. I would always say the best advice is to go to a local football club with your laptop, with a phone, have a streaming service if you can afford it, and just say to the club, doesn't matter who they are, even if one man and a dog watch them, just say, can I come and do your games, and put it on the stream? Because they'll say, well, actually, my granddad can't come there. He'll listen to it you might only get 10 people, but the main benefit is that you can do it, and then you listen back. And I would always say that I listened back religiously to what I did for years and years and years. I don't do it so much now, but I listened back, and I was picking out what was, you all have habits. Mm-hmm. You might say the same thing, have the same phrases. You make notes. You can't do them all at once, but you work through those notes gradually, and then every commentary you do, I'm going to work on not umming too much. I'm going to work on not leaving dead air. I'm going to work on not saying the same phrase over and over again. and then gradually you work up to a point where you can put a show reel together and go to a local station, there's all these other fan-based things now, and say, look, I can commentate on there. Can I have an opportunity? EFL are doing lots of commentaries now, and there are young guys coming in getting opportunities there. So it's a good grounding, and you can make your mistakes there. You want to make your mistakes there where fewer people are listening. That's the best option. And you're going to make mistakes, and I made mistakes at network level. I made boo-boos where you get pulled into an office and say, why did you do that? Why did you do this? So you're always going to make those mistakes, but make those basic mistakes at the beginning when very few people are listening. But especially with the competition that's out there now, you've got to try and get yourself ahead. So do as much, even if you're on a 3-year broadcast journalism course at the UEA or Lincoln or Derby or somewhere, still spend your spare time. And I know it's difficult, but if you're single or you haven't got children or anything, use that time to get yourself ahead and put yourself in the shop window.
And you think there's still room for everyone in this industry? You don't have to have played football in the early 2000s to be a pundit or
no.
a commentator?
Well, I always think that I think there's a defined line between a commentator and a pundit or an analyst or a co-coms or a summariser, as they call them at the BBC, because commentary is a bit of an art form. I don't want to get too highfalutin about it, but it is a bit of an art form, and it's not something you can just learn on the spot. There are people there who've got a natural talent for it, but it still takes years to get yourself to a certain level. And I'm trying to think, there was a guy in local radio who used to be a professional footballer, but if you look at all the professionals, ex-professionals who are in the high-profile jobs and TV, Match of the Day and all that, how many of them are actually commentating, holding the commentary together? Because it's one thing to be the analyst and the co-cons, it's another thing to actually hold it together and know how it all works. And I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone in a high-profile position who's been a high-profile footballer. Other than the ones who are analysts and summarisers. Because really, they're used for their expert analysis. I've not played professionally. I know football, and I played it, and I know the ins and the outs, but I've never been in a professional dressing room. I've never been coached by a professional. So their knowledge is really the add-on to what you do. Well, I don't say add-on, I don't mean, you know what I mean. Complements what you do. You're providing you're the action man, and they're the experienced man, and the two come together. And when you get really good commentary teams, it can be a really good listen.
Yeah. Brilliant. So you've talked about being staff members for various companies, but you're now primarily freelance.
Yeah.
And was that a conscious choice?
Yes and no. BBC Sport moved to Manchester, Salford, back in 2011. And while I was still staff when they announced this, probably a couple of years earlier, and everybody was thinking, oh no, I've got to move to Manchester. But luckily for me, I was working on the road doing matches and press conferences around London and the Midlands. And so I wasn't included in the move. So I was fortunate, so I stayed. But as soon as the move happened, the BBC then said, we need to make some more redundancies and we're going to trim down the commentary team, which was only about 13 or 14 commentators / reporters. And I looked at it and thought, oh, that doesn't bode well for me, because in that group were people like John Murray, who's now the BBC's chief football correspondent. There was Conor McNamara, Alistair Bruce Ball, Darren Fletcher. These guys were all more established commentators and doing more commentary than me. I was doing commentary, but not to the same amount or level as they were getting the higher profile games. And I looked at the list, and then I was a bit surreptitious, but I managed to get through to HR because I wanted to know how many. They never said how many spots were going to be taken up, how many roles were going to be lost. So I managed to find out through HR in a roundabout way that it was going to be probably four, possibly 5, of a group of 14. So what's that? That's not very good odds when you're up against people like John Murray and that. And I looked at it and I almost did it like a Premier League table. I listed out who I think would stay, and I was in the bottom 4. So I almost knew what was coming. So I thought, do I wait? Do I let them decide with the risk, with the possibility of not going, or do as I think, having read the situation, make my own decision? So I I ummed and ahed for weeks and weeks, and I thought, and I wasn't happy at the time because things had changed a bit, and I wasn't getting used as much and doing quite the same because I'd done some really good stuff, and I wasn't quite getting as much as that. So that also gave me an inclination that maybe my time is coming to an end. So I made the call myself, and I thought I'm going to take voluntary and be in control of the situation. So I went in, made it easy for them, took redundancy, but I was incredibly fortunate that as soon as I left, and I left at the end of the 2011-12 season. I did a game on the last day at Norwich. Left. You can't work for the BBC for 3 months after there's a grace period because you've got taken redundancy. You can't work as a freelancer. But I managed to get a job with UEFA at the Euros. I did the London Olympics and I did the Paralympics as a freelance. I had a brilliant summer, and then I picked up some new stuff. Five Live took me back, and until I'd say the last couple of years, didn't really look back. And I was very fortunate. Timing is key with a lot of things. As good as you might be, as reliable as you might be, as hardworking as you might be, timing makes a massive difference. I think of the number of times I've picked up things. Can I tell you just one particular story?
Yeah.
When I made the decision to go freelance, and there's a friend of mine, family friend of mine, not a close friend, but someone I know who has been, I don't think she is now, she might be now, but she's a production manager, quite well respected, worked at IMG and a few other companies, and she was at UEFA. And over the years, when we bumped into each other at church gatherings or wherever, family things, she'd always say, "Oh, how's it going at the Beeb?" And I said, "Oh, it's okay." And then I got to the last 2 or 3 years of the BBC where I said I wasn't overly happy. And I remember calling her and saying, "Look, I'm thinking I might," this was before the redundancies, "I might go freelance." I said, "But it's a big call because obviously I've got a regular job and I'm still doing a reasonable amount of stuff." She said, "Well," obviously she was at UEFA, the European football's governing body. She said, "Well, when you do, get in touch." She said, "Let me know because obviously I know people and all this." So I said, I will. And I made the decision, and she was the first person I called. When I'd made the decision, I called her. And talk about timing, I rang her and she said, "Your call could not have been better timed." She said, "I've just finished a meeting with my boss. We are going to," this was for the 2012 Euro in Poland, "we're going to do an audio, provide audio for broadcasters around Europe, and we need someone to look after that hub. Just a team of 3 people. You be in that team. It's not a broadcast job; it's a production job. Do you think you could do it?" I went, "Yeah." She said, "You'll get training on it. Let me talk to my boss, and I'll get back to you." Within the hour, she came back. She said, "You got the job."
Oh my God.
6 weeks in Poland, all expenses paid, per diems, meal vouchers, a good fee. He'd heard of me because he listened to Five Live. So, and obviously she vouched for me, saying that she's known me for years. And I didn't even speak to him, and he gave me the job. And I mean, that's just incredible fate.
Yeah.
But it does prove that timing can make all the difference. There's been things I've missed along the years that I don't know of. Mm-hmm. And I've tried to get things. I've tried to get jobs. There was one particular avenue I wanted to go down, and it never worked. Mm-hmm. And other people I know, similar position, managed. I'd say there were 4 of them, and it all paid off for all of them. They all managed, but it's just timing.
Yeah.
A lot of it's timing. Mm-hmm. And you try not to be too hard on yourself if things don't come off. It's difficult because you always think it must be me, they don't like me, but a lot of it is like, it just doesn't fit at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Any myths that you'd like to debunk?
Any myths? Ooh. What I would say is, and I'm not saying it, I have had some very fortunate encounters with well-known people, and I've been in positions, I can think of loads of positions where I've been in a moment, like Formula One I did for a season. I was the pit lane reporter, and it was the first season that Fernando Alonso won the world title. And I just so happened to be right in front of his car as he pulled in, having won the championship. All his crew came out, and I was in the crew with Alonso 15 feet from me, standing up, celebrating the title. You just find yourself in these moments, pitch side at FA Cup finals, on the pitch at FA Cup finals with Jose Mourinho or someone like that. Those are the glamorous things, but you don't get those without doing the hard yards initially, the voluntary stuff at the beginning, learning everything, the cold days at Fakenham, the falls, the pitfalls, the late nights at Radio Norfolk splicing tape just to learn how to do it. You don't walk into that. You don't walk onto Wembley's pitch. You don't walk onto the track at Silverstone and do that. So it can be great, and I've been incredibly lucky to do that. But I know that I wouldn't have had that opportunity if I hadn't done the other stuff before and hadn't had the luck and the timing. So many things come into it. All I'd say is if you're starting out in this industry, some of the most important things, clearly, you work hard. If you don't work hard in this industry, you won't get very far anyway, because people won't use you. You work hard. You also have to be an affable person. You need to be able to get on with people, because if you don't get on with people, if you're an annoying person, I mean, there are people in the industry, but you have to be pretty good at your job if you're not easy to work with. So being easy to work with, reliability is massive. At the beginning, availability. When you get down the line, you can turn stuff down. Because you don't want to be taking everything. Because a lot of people that book you are production people, and they have a lot of work to do. They've got to fill crews, they've got to fill rotors. And I'm not saying they just put anyone in, but if you're someone that says, yeah, I'll do that, and you do it well, they'll come back to you the next time. Entitlement and arrogance, not confidence, arrogance, are probably the worst things you could come in with, because you won't get very far. And the only other thing to say is that, like I mentioned, when I started out, the jobs were fewer. It wasn't considered a normal job, and most people weren't really aware of it as a normal job. But the competition wasn't really there. The opportunities weren't there either, but so it was a bit of luck. Now, the opportunities are vast, and you can even start on your own. This sort of podcasting and streaming, you can do that yourself because of technology, which we didn't have back then. But the competition to get to that higher level of like commentary, to be on the networks, is so fierce. Even now, with my experience, I struggle to get on certain things. I certainly don't walk into doing commentary jobs for people. I don't get responses from people. That's how, I just want to be honest about it. I write to people, I contact people, I don't even get an acknowledgement. And I've got 30 years of experience, and I've been at network. And I'm not saying I should be given a job. All I'm saying is that's how hard it can be. So I can't imagine how hard it is at the bottom end. You're coming in out of uni, having maybe done some of your own stuff. You've got to be, I think if you've got the passion, you'll keep doing it. You'll run out of steam if you're not passionate about it. If you want to do it for the money, you're probably not, I wouldn't bother, because it takes a while to get to that level, and you have to be in a certain band to be able to earn a good living out of it, because the majority of people probably earn a reasonable living, or part-time, or voluntary. It's a hard graft, and it's layers of working your way up. It's not an overnight sensation. There are people, I guess, on YouTube and that who become overnight sensations, but those are few and far between, especially with commentary. It's not something you can just go and pick up a mic. It always makes me laugh. I've had people in the past saying, "You're a football commentator. God, you just get your microphone, show up, commentate on the game." And I went, if only you knew. You spend years getting to that level, and even now, most commentators will spend anything from half a day a minimum to a day and a half, 2 days preparing for a commentary if they're doing something high profile. There's a lot of preparation involved. But in terms of getting into the industry, you've got to take the hits. And try not to take it personally. And the last thing I'll say, subjective nature of it. If you're going to be a broadcaster, I think if you're a production side, it's less of a problem. But subjectively, if you're an on-air voice or on-screen person, you have to remember that we've all got different tastes. Your favourite broadcaster might be someone that I don't rate. My favourite broadcaster will be someone you don't rate. Same with commentators. And I think all the commentators at those higher levels, they're all good commentators, but it's a taste thing. And if you've got an editor who makes a decision, they have the key. And that's what can, one, be frustrating, and it can get to you, but ultimately, there's nothing you can do about it. So that's something to bear in mind, especially when you're starting out. Don't be deflated or demoralised by that, because ultimately someone out there, if you're good, and you have to be good at it, someone out there will like what you do and you'll get there. But it can be a long haul. It can be a long haul. Good luck.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks again to Mike for their time. For more information on becoming a sports commentator, head to prospects.ac.uk. For a full-length video version of this episode, check out our YouTube channel at FutureUPod. If you enjoyed the episode, do feel free to leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. Thank you, as always, for listening, and good luck on your journey to Future You.